Joao Palhinha is on the verge of joining Tottenham Hotspur on a season-long loan deal from Bayern Munich, and this is one that has really seemed to split the fan base. A lot of people are in the camp of, this is a brilliant signing, look at what he did at Fulham. He got unfortunate when he moved to Bayern Munich because he didn't fit the system. Vincent Kompany didn't have a plan for him. He didn't really fit in, but he was a £50 million player, and look at his stats in the Premier League. And there's other people who are saying this isn't the right profile for Tottenham Hotspur. Look at the issues that we've seen in pre-season. This doesn't really go any way to solving this. It's only a loan deal. We want a permanent, etc., etc. There's lots of discourse and narratives flying around, but in this video I'm going to try and look at the pros and look at the cons and sort of come to a conclusion of how I feel about this signing, because I think there's valid arguments on both sides. Like I say, and it is one that is going to be really interesting to see how he fits in, what plan Thomas Frank has for him, and sort of how he responds to that and what level he can get to at Tottenham Hotspur. And look, it comes down to the point at the end of the day, if Thomas Frank wants him, we're at the stage now where we all have to get behind him. We all have to sort of back that plan that Frank has for him, of course. And if you are new here, before we properly get into the video, please like the video if you do enjoy it. If you don't enjoy it, then I guess don't like the video. Subscribe if you're new around here as well. And yeah, let's get into the video. Now, first things first, it goes without saying that Joao Palhinha is a brilliant footballer. You don't get a move to Bayern Munich for £50 million. You don't start for Portugal regularly if you aren't a midfielder with huge qualities. And he does have huge qualities. His off-the-ball work is some of the very best in Europe. We're talking one of the best midfielders here in Europe in terms of breaking up play, tackles, interception numbers. They've always been ridiculously high since he stepped through the door at Fulham. And, it was unfortunate that when he moved to Bayern Munich, the system had moved past him a little bit. Vincent Kompany didn't quite have that role for him in that system. You had lots of Joshua Kimmich, Leon Goretzka, Pavlovic, who were starting ahead of him in that midfield. And it was just really unfortunate. And I think getting him on a season-long loan deal to plug a gap in the squad where we don't necessarily have a similar profile to him, or we have similar profiles but not somebody to his level, I think it can only really be viewed as a positive thing that we've not gone out there and spent 40, 50 million pounds on him. He's not going to be our long-term midfielder. He's 29, 30 years of age. This feels like very much a stopgap signing. Maybe if he performs excellently this season, we do take up an option to buy him, or we do go out and negotiate with Bayern Munich and buy him, but it feels fairly risk-free, and it feels like at the bare minimum we've added a really nice profile to our squad and somebody who can help us in certain game states. But I think that's what the key thing is, right? Is that in certain other game states, he might not help us. He's not somebody who's going to sit there, dictate games, set the tempo, be that, progressive passer, somebody who's going to punch the ball through the lines. He's just not that type of midfielder, and that's where some people I've seen have had an issue with that, because that is a midfielder that Tottenham need. It's something that we've seen in pre-season so far. That deep line progressive playmaker is a profile that would be so welcome at Spurs. We all know this. And I think when you look at the squad that we've currently got, the likes of Bentancur, Sarr in there, Bergvall, you've got Bissouma as well, Archie Gray, who can also play midfield. You've got a lot of profiles there who I think are almost quite similar in terms of good ball carries. Bergvall, Sarr, Bentancur, I think their best traits are when they are carrying the ball and when sort of they're playing off of instinct. They're not midfielders who are going to sit and dictate a game. They're also not midfielders. Well, I think Sarr is absolutely elite off the ball, as we saw today against Arsenal. But Bentancur, Bergvall, they're not elite midfielders off the ball. And I think Joao Palhinha sort of gives you that. I think Joao Palhinha would give you more of a license to maybe play a more free-flowing midfield ahead of him if you had Palhinha sitting, but that feels like it might have suited an Ange Postecoglou Tottenham Hotspur maybe more than it does suit a Thomas Frank's Tottenham Hotspur. And I think, again, that's where people have had the problem. I think people think if we're going to sign one midfielder, then it shouldn't have been the Joao Palhinha mould. And I would agree with that. I think if we're only going to sign Joao Palhinha this summer, it feels as though that does leave us a little bit short, because a lot of the profiles of teams that we're going to be playing next season, or a lot of the teams we are going to be playing, obviously, are going to sit off against us. When we're playing at home against teams in the lower end of the Premier League table, in the bottom half, certain styles of teams, for example, Nottingham Forest, whatever, they sit off quite a lot, and you need players who are going to move teams from side to side, dictate the tempo, have high touch, high passing volumes, and somebody who can punch those passes through the lines. Yes, we got it in Romero back here. Yes, we got it in Pedro Porro. Yes, Bergvall, Bentancur, they can do it, but they're not elite at it. And I think that's where people think if we're going to take our games to the next level, it's why people were getting so excited about the Adam Wharton links. Joao Palhinha is not going to take that side of Tottenham Hotspur to the next level. And I think, again, that is where people have had the biggest problem, because people probably think, we can get away with the Bentancur and Sarr double pivot, as you saw against Arsenal today. Those two defensively really work, and I think they're good enough as a double pivot to sort of sort Tottenham Hotspur in that element. And I guess some people are feeling as though Joao Palhinha is sort of an unnecessary profile to add to the squad because we don't necessarily need that. If we were playing with a lone number 6, Joao Palhinha I think would have been an outstanding signing because he's somebody who covers that ground, eats up that ground almost by himself, and he is somebody who can screen that defence brilliantly. But you know, like I said, on a season-long loan deal, he can fit into this midfield. You know, like I said, you can play maybe a more advanced. You can maybe play a Bergvall and Maddison midfield. Maybe you wouldn't play a Bergvall and Maddison midfield if you had Bentancur sat next to him, but maybe it gives you a little bit more freedom to do that if you've got a Joao Palhinha. Against teams where Tottenham will be the more mid-block, low-block side, looking to break on the transitions, Joao Palhinha will be excellent for that as well because he's somebody who can sit in front of that defence, screen that defence, play the simple passes. You know, he's not terrible on the ball. He can play football. You know, he can play with the ball. He can make, you know, the simple passes. He can get out of trouble in certain situations to an okay standard. And in terms of off the ball, like I said, you know, he'll make an Odegaard, a Cole Palmer, a Phil Foden, or whoever it is, those elite number 10s, he'll make their lives a nightmare if we have him in that midfield and sort of sit him in there against those teams that are trying to break us down on the edge of the box. He'll tackle anyone, he'll intercept everything, and that is where I think you'll see the best of him. And, you know, again, on those more transitional games, if we push men up the pitch and we have Joao Palhinha sat there and let the other just go, then he will be sat there for then if we get the ball turned over and they break on us. Joao Palhinha is an elite profile for that side of the game. For the off-the-ball side of the game, he is absolutely elite. So I do understand the signing from that point of view. I think if we sign Joao Palhinha on a season-long loan and then go and spend some money on a progressive passer, a deep line progressive passer, for example, an Angelo Stiller. I'm not saying he's realistic really from Stuttgart, but that sort of profile, somebody who maybe lacked in a bit of the off-the-ball stuff, but somebody who was elite on the ball to sit at the base of that midfield, then all of a sudden you're talking about two players who are lovely options in there and sort of contrasting profiles who can both provide different things. But I just think if it is only Joao Palhinha, then you'll get problems. But yeah, if we do sort that other midfield profile, then this would take this signing from, say, a 6 out of 10 in my head to maybe a 7 or an 8 out of 10. And that would be, you know, that would be a lot better. And I think it's difficult to work out really with Joao Palhinha because we haven't really seen him play football in the last year. You know, he didn't really play at all at Bayern Munich. We didn't really see if he can make a step up to that more possession-based system. I guess the kind of answer was maybe no, because he wasn't being selected by Vincent Kompany. But he is somebody who can have major benefits. You know, if you put him in here and you put a Lucas Bergvall next to him and a James Maddison there, he's a good profile to have in there. But is he necessarily that necessary in a double pivot? I'm not so sure. Now, another positive that I think he definitely does give is he could change the dynamic a little bit of that midfield partnership. It could give a little bit more license, a little bit more freedom to the player next to him because of how much ground he can eat up in this area. He can almost do the job of two midfielders on his own. So it could kind of almost change it in games a little bit more to more of a system that you saw sometimes under Ange when two of the midfielders were pushing forward a little bit more and you sort of have Joao Palhinha who comes across and screens this back four almost by himself at times if we are playing those more possession-based sides. And that could be something that definitely works for us. Is it ideal? Maybe not, but it could be something that 100% works. You know, when you look at the likes of Dejan Kulusevski and James Maddison, if we sign to Gibbs White or if we go and sign a similar profile to a Gibbs White, it could give you more license to play them in the 8 and James Maddison in the 10. That could be really, really nice. I also think something that is majorly positive about Joao Palhinha is his height, his ability from set pieces. We've seen that against Arsenal in the Premier League. I mean, we've seen that at Tottenham. I remember he won a towering header at Craven Cottage, I think 2 years ago in our Carabao Cup game. I think I remember him doing it and nearly scored from that. So he is a major threat from set pieces, really aggressive in the air, can attack the ball at both ends, and obviously that's something that Frank has always been massively focused on in his midfield. He quite likes that midfielder with some height, with some aerial dominance too. Look at the likes of Christian Norgard when he was at Brentford, and I think that it's a signing that makes sense with Thomas Frank in charge in terms of that profile. He clearly likes that profile, and look, you know, if we're going to be one of those teams where we are sitting a little bit deeper next season, sitting in a mid-block, choosing our moments to, you know, press. I think Frank wants to be a transitional side. I think you look at the signings that he's made so far. Tried to sign Morgan White, Mohamed Kudus, Joao Palhinha. Now, these are players who are elite, I think, when the game turns into a more transitional game for that side. And I think maybe that's something that Thomas Frank is really focusing on in his first year. And I just think we need to make sure that it doesn't go too far one way and that we still have those players and that dynamic for those low blocks, because I think you've seen it at times, for example, against Luton in our last pre-season game. It was really noticeable when they were more sat off us, the profile that we lacked in that midfield, and we were really struggling to penetrate and to fire those balls in between those lines. And it really only came down to Cuti Romero, who wasn't even playing in that game, who, you know, he did it in the Reading game, he did it in the Wycombe game, you know, earlier on in that day. But you was thinking, we need a Romero in this type of game. It would be great to have a Romero in that type of game, because he brings so much of that, and when we lose him, we don't have a lot of that. And I think, again, like I said, Joao Palhinha and another midfielder who can do that, and this turns into an 8 out of 10 signing. Right now, I think as our only midfield option, as our only midfield signing, it doesn't change a whole lot in terms of one of the game states that we are probably going to be seeing Tottenham play against a lot next season, which is playing that more mid-low block, Tottenham having the ball, you know, struggling to break lines, struggling to penetrate. And so I think right now I'm kind of reserving judgment a little bit on the signing. I think it's a good standalone signing, you know, but it has to come with a complementary signing. It's almost like, I don't know, if you have a starter at a restaurant, it's a nice starter, but you wouldn't just be pleased with the starter, would you? You then want a really nice main, and then you think, oh, I'm full now. Yeah, I've got the diverse, you know, I've got everything I needed now. So that was a shit analogy, but anyway, we move on. So yeah, I like Palhinha. I really like him as a player. I do have my reservations that I hope I've explained in this video, but look, he makes us better in certain areas, and I think he's somebody who is, like I said, he's elite off the ball, and we have signed one of the best off the ball midfielders in the entirety of Europe, which can only be seen as a positive, right? It's a risk-free signing him on a straight loan with, I don't think it's an we're definitely not going to have an obligation to buy. It might be an option to buy, who knows? It's always nice to have the option, I guess. So it's a risk-free signing, really. It feels, it adds a profile. If we get Joao Palhinha and move on Bissouma, that's a net positive anyway, I would say. In terms of, we wanted to move on Bissouma anyway, really. So, look, if we get another signing, this is a brilliant signing. Right now, reserving judgment a little bit, but also still a positive, I guess. So, yeah, those are my thoughts. It's kind of difficult to sum up when you don't know how we're going to look heading into the season. You don't know the real problems that we're going to face yet, and how certain players can maybe develop into a different role. And the role that Joao Palhinha is going to have next season, how big of a role will that actually be? So, yeah, it's going to be really, really interesting to see with this one. Hopefully he signs soon and we can see him. Maybe he joins up with the squad on tour, because I think, you know, he's played the Club World Cup with Bayern Munich. I think, you know, he should be up to fitness fairly quickly. So maybe we see him in our last game of pre-season against Bayern Munich, potentially, if he's allowed to do that. Or maybe we see him off the bench in the Super Cup, or maybe we see him in the first home game against Burnley. Who knows? But hopefully we can see him. Hopefully we can judge him soon. And yeah, nice one for watching. I appreciate that. And I'll be back with a new video soon.